Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking our favourite undead bony boys, the Forsaken, and their lovely new faction, the Alliance. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, Taliesin, you clickbait shillman, bait-clicking bastard, we all know that you're only making this video so you can have fun going into Wowhead's dressing room and dressing those Forsaken models in Alliance armor sets and tabards. What kind of tenuous shit are you going to come up with now to justify this Alliance undead bullshit for a whole video? To which I say, hey, get off my case, alright? Because I am far from the only one who is thinking in these terms right now. Right from the very beginning of Battle for Azeroth, there's been a general feeling amongst those in the community that Blizzard are gearing up to have those ex-citizens of Lordaeron, the most tragic of horde races, murdered by the Lich King and then cast out by their own friends and family in the Alliance, make a shuffling return to their old allegiances and become, well, not Forsaken anymore, I guess. And furthermore, be a playable option on the Alliance side of the divide. As the expansion has gone on, this feeling has only grown with every passing patch and every new chapter of the story, and with the discovery of that beautiful Calia Menethil model in the data for patch 825, for many of us it's no longer a case of will the Forsaken become playable for the Alliance, as how will Blizzard go about it? And that's what we're talking about today, because we did touch on this subject in the last Taliesin Talks, and I admit I have skin in this game. Forsaken are my favourite race in World of Warcraft. I love their little models and their little animations, but mostly I love the story and the lore behind them and the developments that has seen over the years. I am absolutely still of the opinion that the Alliance will soon have these playable options, but Blizzard have so many different ways that they could make that happen, it might end up looking very different from how many of us imagine. Will they take the Lightforged undead route? Will they have Forsaken defectors taking up Alliance colours? Will it be a case of there simply being no factions at all next expansion? And what about those freshly raised undead Night Elf Rangers that we made a big song and dance about in 8.1? And what role is Calia Menethil going to play in all of this exactly? So join us for a proper old school Taliesin Talks, where unlike recently there really will be very little interesting to look at all, I promise, as we ask, how will Blizzard implement Alliance Forsaken into the game? Okay? Go, 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 go. Of course, in my mind, every single person watching this video just sat through that intro nodding their head sagely and saying out loud, yes, Taliesin, you are so wise, I completely agree, there will be Alliance Forsaken next expansion, and I can't wait to listen to you discuss how that's going to happen. But it's just as likely that you have no idea what I'm talking about. Like, why on earth does everyone think that there will be undead saluting Anduin in 9.0? This can't really be a thing that people think, is it? Taliesin is clearly an idiot, excuse me while I leave a really shitty comment and downvote this turd of a video. And if that's you, well, thanks for the comment, I guess, but also allow me to give you a quick recap on the events that have brought us to this point and rundown of just why so many BFA players are on the Alliance Forsaken bandwagon right now. So, the Forsaken that we play in the game are largely made up of the ex-human citizens of Lordaeron, the mightiest human kingdom led by King Taliesin Menethil, the founder of the Alliance, no less. His oldest child, Calia, and his son, Arthas, and you might have heard of Arthas, maybe you've heard of him, he's quite famous. The kingdom's human population was decimated by the undead plague, turning all of those affected into mindless scourge servants of the Lich King, with ultimately the entire country falling as Arthas himself became corrupted and marched north. Thanks to the problems that Illidan caused by trying to melt Northrend though, and apologies because we don't have time to get into all of this properly by the way, because I know that you are sitting there right now thinking, hang on, Illidan tried to melt Northrend, and yes, the short answer is yes, Illidan tried to melt the entire continent of Northrend, which meant the Lich King's overall grip on some of his more distant minions, i.e. the ones in Lordaeron, weakened, and some of those undead humans regained a sliver of their memories and their past personalities and independence. The recently undead high elf Sylvanas used these new, not so mindless ex-scourge as the backbone of her new Forsaken army, eventually fighting off the forces of the Lich King and the Legion and reclaiming the capital city of Lordaeron, which was called Lordaeron, as their own, and joining the Horde when they realised that their old human buddies in the Alliance didn't really want anything to do with them anymore and actually would rather that they were purged from the earth with fire, which is fair enough. And that's always been the tragedy of the Forsaken, hasn't it? They are undead humans who still retain a semblance of their humanity, but who are shunned by all other humans and seen as monsters, even by their own families who escaped the plague and survived. It's a theme that was explored very touchingly in the novel Before the Storm, which gave those normal Lordaeron-dwelling citizens of the Undercity some really awesome scenes that showed them doing their best to get on with their unlives, sewing on new limbs when the old ones stopped working, and just generally being really cool and funny and chill and, well, human. The book reveals that many of the Forsaken citizens aren't even sure that they want the relative immortality that being undead gives them, and that there was a genuine political movement in the Undercity demanding that they be given the right to properly die. In a desperate attempt to avoid a new war, and spoiler, but it doesn't work, there is a war, Anduin organises a reunion of sorts, where select Forsaken citizens are given the chance to meet with their living Alliance friends or family on the neutral ground of Stromgarde, something that not all of the Forsaken are even interested in, but which a significant number certainly are. For many, the reunion is heartbreaking, as their old families and friends simply cannot accept that these rotting undead carcasses retain any of the human that they once loved, but many do manage to reconnect in incredibly meaningful ways, which is a massive step forward for human-Forsaken relations. Now, Sylvanas does not like what she sees, and when she recalls her subjects, some of the Forsaken can't bear to be parted from their loved ones for a second time and make a break for the Alliance lines trying to defect, at which point Sylvanas murders them all, including those that were obediently returning to her as ordered, and including one Calia Menethil, the living heir to the lost Lordaeron throne, who was there incognito. Calia, who was just killed, is then raised by the Naaru Syrah in the Netherlight Temple with the help of Anduin and Alonsus Fail as essentially a new type of undead that we know very little about. Sylvanas has gone on to behave more and more mercilessly as the Battle for Azeroth expansion has gone on, destroying what remained of the Forsaken capital with blight, raising slain night elves as undead rangers, murdering Forsaken that she sees as traitors, and just generally splitting opinion and loyalties straight down the middle by being a badass banshee baddie. And here is where those players who are talking about Alliance Forsaken are at. We have a Forsaken population divided in their absolute commitment to the will of their Banshee Queen, many of whom are demonstrably hankering to reconnect with their old lives, and who are now all, don't forget, displaced refugees with no Undercity to call their home. We have an Alliance who, under Anduin, has shown a willingness to accept the Forsaken back, at least in theory, both at the Stromgarde reunion and with the acceptance of the raised Derek Proudmoore and Calia Menethil. We have a handful of living humans also demonstrably able to overcome their horror of the undead and attempt to love them again as family. We've got the true heir of Lordaeron, who many of the Forsaken will see as their rightful queen, now an undead herself, and fresh on the scene at just the same time that Sylvanas is testing loyalties to the limit with her, well, let's call it aggressive leadership style. Add all of that lore to an expansion that has seen allied races almost double the amount of playable races that each faction has access to, in a storyline that puts the Horde and Alliance conflict front and center in a way that suggests big changes might be coming in the way factions even work going forward. And to say the scene is set for Alliance Forsaken is something of an understatement, to be honest. The scene is set, the audience are all in their seats, the lights are dimmed, and everyone is just waiting for the curtain to raise on a new chapter for some of those Forsaken. Oh, and by the way, I know that there will already be loads of comments by now of people quite correctly saying, Taliesin, if a Forsaken is accepted back into the Alliance, then by definition they are no longer Forsaken, and you should really stop calling them Forsaken, you idiot. And actually that is a good point, and you are totally right. But no, I'm still going to keep on using the term Alliance Forsaken going forward, even though it's not entirely accurate, mostly just out of clarity and ease of use, but also for another reason, which we'll get to a little bit later, so sorry if that offends you. But with all of that said, from both a lore and gameplay perspective, how are Blizzard likely to make Alliance Forsaken a thing? Well, as I see it, there are three most likely options. The first way we could end up having playable Forsaken on the Alliance is that next expansion, there might just be no more factions. This is actually a much more popular theory among the player base than you might think. Like I say, most people expect some kind of shake-up in the structure of the factions and how they work as a result of the giantest ever faction war focus of BFA. I can't imagine, for example, that there are too many people who genuinely think Sylvanas is going to be Warchief by the start of 9.0. And talk of a possible third faction still persists on the forums, but with Jaina and Thrall getting all friendly again, and Lorthamar and Thalyssra successfully teaming up with the Alliance to bring Ashara down, and showing a preference for more teamwork to tackle N'Zoth, many of us expect there to be, at the least, a relaxing of the race restrictions for each faction next expansion. At most, the abolishment of the factions altogether. People can genuinely see a future where Horde and Alliance don't exist, and orcs skip hand in hand with humans through the fields of wheat, taking on whatever existence-threatening baddie comes along next with the power of friendship and non-discrimination, which in fairness is kind of where the story of most World of Warcraft expansions ends up anyway, doesn't it? Before faction tensions have to be restoked so that the fires of war can burn brightly in time for the next expansion. So it's easy to see why so many players think it might just be easier to drop the pretense and do away with factions completely, in which case everyone gets to play Forsaken anyway, and everyone is happy, right? In this scenario, most people envision Sylvanas leaving the Horde or being killed, and Calia stepping in as leader of the Forsaken in a bright, factionless future. But honestly, I don't see this happening. WoW is simply too firmly built on the two-faction idea, not just philosophically, but mechanically. Removing one of the main gameplay structures from the game would be too much upheaval, too much change for the sake of it, too much tenuous finding ways to justify war mode and PvP. I just don't see it, personally. What I can believe is the introduction of choice for at least some races as to which faction they can fight for. I'm not saying everyone's going to be Pandaren, but it's not too hard to imagine the Tauren and the Night Elves finding things in common, or the Void, Nightborn, and Blood Elves being willing to mingle. If the Lightforged Draenei can team up happily with an actual Dreadlord, then the Horde isn't too much of a stretch for them either. And whereas obviously many, the majority even, of the Forsaken would stay loyal to the Horde, or Sylvanas, wherever she is, there would still totally be some willing to stand alongside their old human kin, you'd have thought. That's an idea we'll explore in a moment, but there is another option too. And you can blame Calia Menethil for this one, or rather, blame the Naaru, because it was Serah, the Naaru who lives in the Netherlight Temple, the old priest order hall in Legion, who is behind the raising of the heir of Lordaeron. In Before the Storm, after she falls to Sylvanas' arrow, Calia's body is taken back to the temple where, with the help of Anduin and Alonsus Fail, one living human and one undead, but both servants of the light, Serah breathes life into Calia using that power. And now we've got to ask, what actually is the most interesting thing about Calia Menethil? Is it that she is undead now and can finally relate to those of her people who fell to the plague and lived among the Scourge before finding their place in Forsaken society? Or is it that, being raised by the Naaru and the light, she is a new type of undead, a Lightforged undead, and rather than being unique in that, she might actually turn out to be the first in what will end up being a whole new type of race? Because what if Serah really likes what she's created and decides to create more? What if Calia has the power to raise others like her? Could this be the start of a whole new crusade of Lightbound or Light-redeemed or Light-cursed undead beings to sweep across Azeroth? Since Legion saw Sargeras, the Titans, and the Servants of Fel kind of boxed up and put away for later, Blizzard have been busy quietly setting up the next big conflict in World of Warcraft between the Light and the Void. And that fits in really well with the BFA resurgence of the old gods, of course, because N'Zoth and the rest of our tentacly overlords might be big and dangerous and fleshy and glorious, but they are still just the servants, the harbingers, the scouting parties of the real big baddies, the Void Lords. The baddies who are still enough of an unknown quality to have some kind of mystery about them. The baddies who are so bad that Sargeras changed from Valiant Titan Champion Hero to Titan Killing Universe Devourer at the very thought of them taking a hold on our universe. The development, this expansion of Xalatath as a kind of Nyarlathotepia cosmic traveller seems like an attempt to further world build and flesh out Void God, for want of a better word, society. And if the shadowy side of the coming battle is being built upon, what about the light? Well, we've been having glimpses of how that might not be quite the benevolent force of righteous good that some of its followers make out, with Xera's startling lack of concern for consent when it comes to Illidan, to alternative Draenor's, alternative Yrel's seemingly overzealous approach to the conversion of the Magar Orcs. And as such, it's hard to know if Kalia's Lightforged Undead would be a force for good, bad, or, like most things in the World of Warcraft universe, neither. But you can see why people have run with this idea since Kalia's resurrection in the novel. And it has to be said that of all of the speculations regarding Alliance Forsaken, this Lightforged version is by far the least popular among the player base, I think. After all, we have just had the Lightforged Draenei and the Army of the Light in Legion, and they were really cool and everything, especially Tepartos. Where is Tepartos? I miss Tepartos. But you know, they're still here. I don't think anyone wants to see like a Lightforged version of every existing race for the sake of some overarching cosmic conflict storyline and as a cheap way of making Horde races playable for the Alliance. And yeah, that's generally my view as well. An army of glowing light undead corpses has its interesting possibilities, like who the Light would choose to raise next. Tyrion and Uther with his lovely new tomb, which hasn't seen any use yet, spring instantly to mind. And the thought of a light version of the Death Knight's 4 horsemen could be great fun. But for your everyday undead playable characters, it feels a bit lazy and also bypasses pretty much everything that I find interesting about the Forsaken in the first place. Luckily though, I don't think this is where Blizzard is going to go with this story. I might be wrong, I often am, but in Before the Storm, much more importance is put on Calia being undead, like her Forsaken fellow Lordaeron citizens, than how she was raised as undead. There is more emphasis on this change being important because she now resembles the undead of Lordaeron more than before, rather than any hint that she would like to change those undead to be more like her. So if I had to put money on it, I would currently bet against Calia being the jumping off point for any kind of playable Lightforged undead for whatever faction. But I wouldn't bet against it being something that we see some of in the story. Like I say, I'll be watching Uther's tomb very, very carefully from now on. And so we come to the scenario that I personally find most likely, and it's one that we have touched on when we were discussing Calia in the previous Taliesin Talks. I think Before the Storm and all those really beautifully drawn scenes in the Undercity and Stromgarde with Forsaken and their almost existential problems about how they deal with having 2 distinct existences before and after Undeath. I think all of that is explicitly setting up the idea that there are a not insignificant amount of Forsaken who would take the chance and defect to a Calia Menethil-led Alliance Forsaken faction. And it's very important, I think, to point out that this is very different to there being no factions or any race just being allowed to play on whichever faction they choose, because lore-wise, these would be Forsaken that have specifically chosen to leave the Horde Forsaken and everything that represents. Their home, although their physical home no longer exists since Sylvanas got a bit handy with the old blight bombs, of course, their people and their security. People have speculated how Forsaken that make this trip to the other side could be called Embraced or Redeemed Undead. But for me, the fascinating thing is that if anything, I think they would be willingly becoming even more Forsaken. Because, okay, fine, Anduin and to a lesser extent Jaina and Gen might be able to see past the horrifying abomination that an undead represents to human eyes, but as Before the Storm proved, the majority of living humans cannot, at least initially. So these Alliance defectors will still be forsaken by many of their new allies, as well as being forsaken by their fellow undead on the Horde side. Because can you imagine the betrayal that the Horde Forsaken would feel towards these guys? The resentment at these kin that turned their back on their home and their leader and their new families in some vainglorious folly at trying to re-assimilate into human society. The remaining Horde Forsaken are going to hate their Alliance counterparts more than they hate literally anything else, which is one of the reasons I'm comfortable using the term Alliance Forsaken, because to me, they would be doubly forsaken. Forsaken squared. Very forsaken. And as someone who finds the Forsaken plight one of the most human and interesting narratives in the game, that excites me because it has potential for so many great stories, so many heartbreaking situations. Here you have these poor people who were cut down by the plague in Warcraft 3 to be raised as mindless scourge, only to somehow rediscover a sliver of their humanity and be rescued by Sylvanas when their former friends and family try to exterminate them as abominations. They then spend 15 years building a new home and society before choosing to leave all of that behind, partly out of a disagreement with the direction Sylvanas is taking and the tactics she's employing in the war, but mostly in a tragically doomed attempt to reconnect to who they were before in a more meaningful way. It's naive, it's foolish, it's almost certainly going to fail, but that hope that the Alliance Forsaken would have to constantly cling to, honestly, what could be more human than that? And one last thing, if this whole video and idea has felt very Alliance-centric to you, well, my little Horde children, I completely agree with you. And if I were Blizzard, and I knew the Forsaken were soon to become a playable option for the Alliance, I would be very tempted, you know, to give Horde players something very cool at the same time. I might even spend an entire expansion establishing that Sylvanas has now raised a whole ton of a new type of race into her Forsaken ranks. When I revealed at BlizzCon or whatever that Alliance Forsaken were going to be a thing, you know, I would be very tempted to tell Horde players, don't worry, because you've got some new soldiers to play with too. The Forsaken Night Elf Rangers. But what do you guys think? Is Alliance Undead going to happen? Will it happen in any of the ways I've theorized, or is there something else so blindingly obvious that I've missed that you're going to have to tell me all about it in the comments? What really is the deal with Calia Menethil? Do we need to be worried about the Light's motivations in all of this? And would you even play Alliance Forsaken at all? I mean, of course you would. Forsaken are awesome. That's a stupid question. Forget I asked. But I would love to hear all of your opinions in the comments below. And thanks for joining us today. If you like this video, don't thank us. Thank our patrons who continue to give their actual real-life money to make all of these videos happen. Without you guys, there would be a whole lot less Taliesin and Evitel, so thank you. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Want to Buy Gold. No, my name is Taliesin from me and Evitel. Until next time, cheerio.